Today's conversation will address key questions shaping the region's future. What would a Kamala Harris presidency mean for the Middle East? What economic and diplomatic shifts might we anticipate? And how might a second term for Donald Trump affect regional stability and US relations with key Middle Eastern countries? What happened yesterday in Beirut and its impact on future regional development? This event is part of a broader effort by the BOPS AUB Collaborative Initiative, the Global Engagement Initiative, and the Department of Political Studies and Public Administration at AUB, to explore how changes in the US leadership could reshape economic policies, diplomatic strategies, and geopolitical dynamics in the region. With that, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished experts and all of you as we begin this timely and important discussion. Today with us, we have first Dr. Amaney Jamal. Amaney is the Dean of the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, Director of the BOPS AUB Collaborative Initiative, and Workshop on Arab Political Development, and Professor of Politics and International Affairs. She is also the co-founder and co-principal investigator of the Arab Barometer Project. Dr. Jamal's scholarship covers the Middle East and North Africa, mass and political behavior, political development and democratization, inequality and economic segregation, Muslim immigration, gender, race, religion, and class. She is an author or an editor of 3 books and numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. She is working on a new book titled The Global Segregation of the Poor. With us also Dr. Hilal Khashan. Dr. Khashan is a professor of political science at the American University of Beirut. He is the author of 6 books. He is currently working on a book titled Saudi Arabia, The Dilemma of Political Reform and the Illusion of Economic Development. He also authored more than 300 articles in refereed journals, such as Journal of Conflict Resolution, British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies, Security Dialogue, Third World Quarterly. He is a regular contributor to Geopolitical Futures. Dr. Chris Achen, he's a Princeton University professor of political emeritus and professor of social sciences. His research interest is political methodology, particularly in its application to empirical democratic theory, American politics, and international relations. He is the author of 2 books, Interpreting and Using Regression, and the Statistical Analysis of Quasi-Experiments. His 2 most recent books are Democracy for Realists with Larry Bartels and The Taiwan Voter, co-edited with T. Wang. He is currently working on new tools for analyzing multi-party elections and on the empirical failures of institutions for deliberative democracy. Moderating today's discussion, we have Joyce Karam. Joyce is the senior news editor of Al Monitor and a journalist with decades of experience covering the Middle East, US foreign policy, and international affairs. She authors Al Monitor's weekly China Middle East newsletter and serves as a professor of political science at George Washington University. Over the past 2 decades, Joyce has worked for leading media outlets, breaking exclusive stories on the Middle East and US policy, and has interviewed high-profile figures, including US Presidents George W. Bush and Joe Biden. I now hand it to you, Joyce.
Thank you, Tanya. For this nice introduction. Thanks everyone for being with us on this rather cloudy afternoon. I brought my sunglasses with me, but it doesn't look like I need them in New York. We meet here at a very pivotal moment for the US and for the Middle East. We're 48 days out from a consequential election on November 5. And we know the degree of instability that the Middle East is going through right now. Gaza, obviously, the elephant in the room, the most brutal and horrific war between Israelis and Palestinians to date. And just, I'm sure you've seen the news in the last 72 hours, what's going on in Beirut, and also the hypersonic missile that was fired from Yemen. All of this to say that while the peoples of the region don't get a vote in this election, but what happens in these elections matter greatly for the region. So I'm very excited to be moderating this panel. Thank you, AUB, for allowing us to have this discussion. We do want it to be as engaging as possible, so we're gonna go around the questions around us, and we'll turn it over to you. So please, questions, comments in the last 30 minutes would be greatly appreciated. But to start it off with, we've agreed that we're not going to use professor and doctor, so we'll just start off with Amaney. Just a more broader question. Why do these U.S. elections, why do they matter for the Middle East?
So thank you so much, Joyce, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's a real honor and privilege to be here in this space sponsored by the American University of Beirut as part of the BOPS AUB Collaborative Initiative. I'd like to say a word about that initiative at the end, but I just also want to thank Amanda, Miranda, Christy, David, Andrea, all the people behind who've been working tirelessly for this event. We're very grateful for your efforts, and thank you all for coming out and showing up for this event. So why are the US elections very consequential for the region? I can write a book about it, but I'm going to try to be brief. I have five key bullet points, right? So the first is whether or not we see major escalation in the region in terms of the ongoing wars, or whether we see deliberate attempts to sort of quell what's going on, I think is going to be linked to who wins the US presidential elections. We know that Donald Trump has already historically advocated military engagement with Iran. Given the conditions in the region right now and where we're at almost like a boiling point, especially with what's happening now in Lebanon with the Hezbollah communications networks being infiltrated by Israel, the region is really, and I don't want to be alarmist. Maybe up until today, I've been saying the real threat of escalation is still not, we're not there yet, but today I'm sort of feeling like, given where we are in the region and given the outcomes of the presidential election, you could basically see that there are influences that might tip us towards a broader regional war that will pull in many of different countries, including in Iran, which would quite honestly be devastating for the entire region, right? So this is the first big issue, and we're happy to talk about this in the Q&A. The second key issue is whether or not, and we can also talk about whether this is even a legitimate process, but whether the region continues to engage on what we call this sort of trying to normalize via a peaceful route to sort of reconciliation and coexistence in the region. Before October 7th, Saudi Arabia was very close to normalizing its ties with Israel. A lot of other countries had already normalized their ties with Israel. Of course, the Palestinian issue was left behind. So if Trump indeed is the president of the United States, my sense is that we're going to see more of the same. The Palestine issue will not be a key issue for a Trump presidency. What we're hearing from the Kamala camp is that at least they're sort of advocating now back to a two-state solution. We can talk about whether that is even feasible, but nevertheless, the idea that you cannot have normalization in the region writ large without resolving the Palestinian issue is extremely important, and that's sort of what we're hearing coming out of the Harris camp. Third, I'll be very quick. I think Jason is looking at me. Democratic backsliding and populism. When we look at public opinion data coming out of the Middle East during the Trump presidency, what we began to see across the board, remember the Middle East underwent a significant wave of mobilization during the Arab Spring that was culminating for demands for greater democracy, or at least greater representation, greater civil liberties, political liberties. And then, of course, after the Arab Spring with the Trump presidency, what we saw is that there was sort of like this, not only democratic backsliding, but an entrenchment of authoritarianism across several Arab countries. But more importantly, is that at the civil society level, at the societal level, citizens began to question the utility of democracy in their daily lives. This idea that the instability that was brought by the Arab Spring was really a big major turnoff. It had severe economic consequences in many countries, and citizens began to sort of embrace this idea of, well, maybe a populist leader or a regime that is less democratic but that can deliver economically might might be an attractive alternative, what we often call the China model, right? And really quick, I'll say this just, and I'll promise I'm gonna, but the China model, this idea that you can have this new authoritarianism, right? A new authoritarian country. So look what's happened in China lately, right? They've basically elevated a good segment of impoverished people. In 2000, the average per capita GDP for a Chinese family was around $1,000. By 2020, that same family was earning $12,000. So you've increased over 20 years the per capita GDP 12-fold in China. Look at Tunisia during the Arab Spring. The average Tunisian family at the eve of the Arab Spring of Ben Ali's rule was earning, in terms of real per capita GDP, was earning more than they were before Qais Said took over. So democracy for the average Tunisian meant economic harm, economic suffering. So with Trump sort of advocating much more of this sort of personal thick strongman sort of leadership, you have to be worried about further democratic retrenchment in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Khashan, Hilal, you've just arrived from Beirut a couple of days ago. Yesterday, I hope you get to go back, actually. And, but if not, we're all happy to host you. What is it like, the view of the US generally, given what's happening with the Palestinians, with Israel, and how do people in the region, what is the view of the US election?
Yeah, the problem with the Middle East that Americans view it as a monolithic entity. It is not. Now, it all depends on what Middle Easterner you are talking about. Now, if you are focusing on what is going on in Gaza, I would say there is a gap between the Arab publics and the ruling elite. The ruling elite don't care, and most of them would rather see Hamas defeated. And the same thing goes for Hezbollah.
Can we be specific? Which ruling elite? There's so many ruling elites.
As you know, Hamas is associated with the Brotherhood. And this applies, aversion to Hamas applies to the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Emeritus, and not Qatar. Qatar has a different regional role to play. But in North Africa, nobody cares. North Africa is far removed from what goes on in the Middle East. So the countries that matter, Egypt doesn't matter anymore. The Emirates and Saudi Arabia are the leading regional countries, the leading Arab countries, and they would rather see Hamas defeated. Iran is a different story. Iran has a tactical alliance with Hamas, and Turkey advocates Hamas, and they view Hamas as a freedom fighter and liberators. But again,
while having normal relations with Israel, normal before October 7th.
How Israel? Well, Turkey has had relations with Israel since its founding. But again, the public opinion in Turkey has always been anti-Israeli. But again, keep in mind that Turkey is a NATO member, and there are limits to how far Turkey can go in dealing with Arabs and the Palestinians. And when the Arab Spring got underway, Erdogan entertained the idea of neo-Ottomanism, but the failure of the Arab uprisings has dashed Turkey's hopes in the region. And in 2008, Turkey adopted the concept of zero enemies. As it happened after the Arab uprisings, Turkey had zero friends in the region. So now they are trying to reverse the trend and re-establish ties with Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Egypt. And 2 weeks ago, Sisi was visiting Erdogan in Ankara, and the two countries decided to relaunch their diplomatic and political and economic relations. So, the Middle East is a difficult issue. And now we talk about the Middle East, you can't ignore the role of Iran. The role of Iran, Iran's ties with the US were good during the Shah, but after the revolution, the US imposed austere sanctions on Iran that were resulted immediately after the housing crisis in 1979. Since then, Iran has been under tight sanctions by the US. And when eventually Obama realized the importance of bringing the conflict with Iran to an end, he negotiated the 2015 Iranian nuclear accord. That was a tough accord to reach. It took years to happen. But as soon as Trump won the presidency, he decided to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. Now, when before Biden came to power, he said if he wins the presidency, he will renegotiate the Iran deal. Now, Iran and the US have tried to renegotiate this deal for years in Vienna, but the Vienna talks did not end successfully. Now, it seems that the same core issues that caused Trump to pull out from the accord again stood in the way of the Democrats' ability to revive the Iran nuclear program. Most people mistakenly think that the real hurdle between Iran and the US is Iran's nuclear program. The Iranian nuclear program has been making news since the early 1990s. It is my understanding that Iran does not want to develop a nuclear weapon. Maybe they want to reach the nuclear threshold because they know the consequences of trying to establish a nuclear system.
Right,
Now,
but if
but
we
the problem-
look at, I don't want to interrupt you, but if you look at how the people of the Middle East, how are they viewing this election? Do they even see differences between Harris or Trump?
Yeah,
What are the
yeah.
priorities
They-
for people, not the elite?
Yeah, they used to expect that the presidential election would make a difference. But for the past elections, most people in the Middle East have come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter. Now, if you look at the Arab-American relations since the creation of Israel in 1948, there has been successive administration, both Democratic and the Republican, but the trend has been similar over the years. So people came eventually to realize that it doesn't matter what happens in Washington, doesn't matter who is elected, because after all, the US is fully committed to the state of Israel, which is the core American policy in the Middle East is the well-being of Israel, its security, and its military superiority. So people lost hope that the change in the administration has an impact on the course of the Arab-Israeli conflict, eventually leading to the creation of a Palestinian state. So people, to a large degree, have become apathetic about the prospects in Washington.
Chris, we've heard that it may matter in a sense that Trump could divert the region more toward an authoritarian and more pro-Israel stance. People in the Middle East, the elite have their own calculus, but the people in the Middle East are largely apathetic to this election. When you look at the US public, when you look at priorities in this election, and you've studied this, does the Middle East, does it land anywhere in these priorities? Where do you see the big issues that are deciding this one?
Thanks, Joyce, and my thanks to everyone who made this meeting possible. I'm an American politics specialist. I do elections. I often say that some people have a problem with drugs and some people have a problem with alcohol, but I have a problem with elections. I just so, but what's an American politics person doing here? You know, in the old days on the SAT exams, they used to give you questions like this. They would say, a hammer, a saw, a screwdriver, and a pomegranate. Which one of these doesn't fit with the others? Well, on this panel, I'm the pomegranate. But I do want to say that thanks to the AUB Boast Princeton initiative, I actually taught American politics at AUB last summer, and made friends there, had a wonderful lunch with Tanya, and so I learned something. I went there convinced that, I'd always wanted to see it, and since my undergraduate days, learning about consociational democracy and so on, and that I would go for 3 weeks and I teach the students, and I taught American politics, and I do some touring, and I would go home. That is not how it worked. I fell in love with Lebanon, and I'm now part of a team. We just met a week ago in Princeton to study the 2026 Lebanon election, if that takes place. So maybe a little less of a pomegranate than I might first appear. With that introduction, let me say a little bit about American politics and this election and its relationship to Lebanon and the Middle East. I think what I can bring to the conversation is the sort of, insider, I'm fourth generation American kind of view of this election. It's sometimes hard coming from the outside or viewing a country from a distance to see some aspects of it that are maybe a little bit subtle. So, Americans often blur together the Christians in Lebanon, but the Free Patriotic Movement is one thing, and the Lebanese forces are another, and the Phalangists are a third, and we just don't want to lump them together. And in somewhat the same way, I think it's important to see what is hard to see from the outside, because the candidates are kind of laying it between the lines. That there are important differences with respect to the Palestinian cause in the Middle East between these candidates. They're actually not small. Trump is.
We will get to that. Sorry, but I do want to refocus the conversation on where does the Middle East fit in with the U.S. public voters' priorities when they're going to vote? Is Gaza on anyone's mind? Does it even matter? Or is it inflation, reproductive rights, the economy? And I'll get back to
sure.
you.
Yeah, I needed to stop sooner than I did. The issue in foreign policy in general is not very important to the American voters, and never has been. Even in years when we were thinking about entering world wars, they still couldn't focus on it. And this is no exception. There are, of course, smaller groups to whom this election is about the Middle East, and the outstanding examples of that are, of course, the people whose heritage is Middle Eastern. Both people of Iranian ancestry, Arab ancestry, Jewish ancestry. To them, it's consequential. But those groups all together don't make up 5% of the American electorate. So the rest of us aren't very focused. China is a gigantic foreign policy issue for the United States, but if you listen to the candidates, there's almost no discussion about anything other than tariffs. And the voters just couldn't care less. Germans stood in the ruins of their homes in 1945 with their women raped by the Russians and said, I thought Hitler was going to work out well. And they weren't paying much attention, and the American voters aren't either. That said, it might still matter. We have, as everyone here knows, an electoral college system. We vote by state because we're a federal system. There are, for the purposes of presidential elections, 51 states. That is, Washington, D.C. has 3 electoral votes. So you need 268 to tie and 270 to win. Right now, I can call all but 7.5 of the states for you. Right now, I can tell you how the state is going to vote, but anybody can.
Are we doing predictions?
This is not a prediction. This is like saying if I drop my water bottle, will it hit the floor? It's that kind of thing. The swing states, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, that's the 7, are still up for grabs. The half is occurs because in 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, they allocate their electoral votes by congressional district. Maine, the Democrats are going to carry both of them. It's irrelevant. The western part of Nebraska, the Republicans serve its farms. If you've ever driven through there, it's Republican country. But the other district is centered on Omaha. And even in Nebraska, there are lots of Democrats, and the Democrats may care. So
You have the vice presidential pick, he's from Omaha originally.
yeah, he is there. He didn't grow up there, but yeah, he was born. That's what, so that doesn't usually matter, but Democrats will make of it whatever they can. So it's those 7.5 where all the money is being focused. The Democrats are going to spend, it looks like, close to $1 billion on advertising. This is welcome to the United States of America. And the Republicans probably 2/3 of that, something like that. So if you live in Pennsylvania, I pity you, you're not going to see anything except ads, which now in the election day. The upshot of this is that small groups in these states can make a difference. This particular set of states they aren't chock full of people of Middle Eastern descent, but in the
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania somewhat, and Michigan even more so. The fraction of Michigan that is of Middle East ancestry is higher than the percentage in Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania is and Dearborn in particular, taught at the University of Michigan for 15 years. I used to go to Dearborn to get good Lebanese food, and that has a set of voters to whom this issue is important.
But so what I hear you saying is even with that, the Middle East issues, the war in Gaza, the potential confrontation with Iran, those are not going to be the make or break issues in these elections, and even among constituencies that prioritize them, these constituencies would not be enough to tip the scale between Harris, right?
Almost. If Trump carries Nevada and Arizona, North Carolina and Georgia, and the Democrats carry Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which is not at all improbable, then Michigan might tip to Trump if there are enough abstentions in the Arab community in Dearborn and other areas. So it is just barely conceivable that the Middle East might be the determining factor in the election.
And I do want to move back to Amaney. In a sense, I heard you, when you mentioned Trump, the confrontation with Iran. When you look at these 2 candidates, let's break it down a little bit on Middle East. Trump versus Harris on Iran, on Gaza, on the Levant, basically, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria. Any differences between them, and what are the main differences? And then Dr. Khashan, I'll come to you for the Gulf. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. So my sense is that I know the public opinion data from the Middle East says that there's not going to be a difference, but the truth is there will be a difference, and this is why. Trump has said he wants to end the conflict in Gaza. It's not clear how he wants to end it. We've heard things like, speed up the bombing versus there needs to be a peace deal. So it's not clear what it means to end the conflict in Gaza. We know that even yesterday, Harris is reiterating the importance of a ceasefire. It's not clear how he's going to secure that, given that nobody's been able to really get the the parties to agree to a ceasefire, but nevertheless, that this is like a policy prerogative is really important to state. Iran, again, Trump was very close to trying to get countries sort of to align in terms of escalating a regional war with Iran. Now the conditions are even more favorable towards an escalation vis-a-vis Iran. So you have to worry about a Trump presidency that has already mobilized on this factor. And then the Levant, again, with Hezbollah being in Lebanon, it also being aligned with, the alliances in Iran with the proxies, Houthis in Yemen, especially with also other proxies in Syria and Iraq. You have to worry that you do have to worry about an escalation that it would basically commit. I wouldn't say commit U.S. troops to this region, but again, using U.S. military force to sort of try to combat and take out a lot of these groups. So we could see much more regional devastation there. And then again, this is also important. Trump still talks about Muslims and Palestinians and Arabs in very disparaging ways, right? Almost in these very dehumanized ways, right? In his own debate, he's like almost Palestinian as a slur. Remember, this is the president that had imposed a Muslim ban. So again, there is a part of Trump's base that really celebrates the use of this terminology and degrading of entire people. Again, this reinforces the stereotype because what's happening in Gaza, what happens in Lebanon, what happens across the Arab world is once you dehumanize these people, the women, the children, it becomes okay that a public is not so conscientious about massive bombing of innocent people because they are always threats and enemies, and there's something inherently uncivil or lacking humanity. So again, a Trump president might reinforce this, which again sort of has a silencing effect.
Do you see Harris as, I mean, to be quite honest, we followed the debates, we followed the DNC. It's hard to see what are the differences from the Biden policy. It's more, it looks more of a continuity. And when you look at the administration's record, I mean, just looking at the mess in Gaza, the American inability to, for the first time in this conflict, inability to enforce a ceasefire. How Harris would be different?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I mean, I guess the basic question is, will Harris presidency use economic leverage or weapons leverage against Israel to secure a ceasefire? And that has yet to be seen, right? The Biden presidency on this issue has been utterly a tremendous failure. And I was just looking at some polls coming out of ISPU, which is the Institute for it's an institute that conducts public opinion polls in swing states. 85% of the Arab and Muslim community who voted for voted for Biden are only of that group, only 15% say they will vote for Harris. The rest will go uncommitted, which to Chris's point is going to play into Trump's presidency. Harris has not been effective in winning back those votes. So there's like questions here, like, not allowing some of the uncommitted voters to speak at the DNC, not really engaging, or at least what we hear is that he's sending people into Michigan and other places to bring back some of that uncommitted vote. But also it's not just Arabs and Muslims in that uncommitted coalition. Within the progressive movement of the Democratic Party, which extends to other minority groups and other coalitional partners, there's huge disappointment with the Democratic Party on the issue of Gaza and the continuation of the human rights violations. So this has hurt Kamala Harris. If you factor in Jill Stein, who will pull away from these progressive votes as well, it should be really concerning for the Democratic Party.
Thank you. Hilal, if you can just zoom in a little bit more on the Gulf states.
Yeah.
You've mentioned they may have their own calculus. Do they favor a candidate in this race? We know how, I mean, I don't want to say exceedingly well, but it was very good, at least. Saudi UAE relations with the former Trump administration. Do you see differences? Do you see them favoring the return of Trump over Harris?
Yeah, both Saudi Arabia and the Emirates would rather see Trump return to the White House. Now, having said that, I think the US, be it the Democrats or Republicans, view the United Arab Republic, the United Arab Emirates differently than they perceive Saudi Arabia. They view the UAE as a more coherent, more capable, and a better US ally, a better US partner, not US ally. Now, the two candidates, both Trump and Biden, did not view, Biden did not view Saudi Arabia with favor. During his election campaign, Biden said Saudi Arabia does not have a redeeming quality, and he clamped down on Saudi Arabia for Crown Prince's assassination of Adnan Khashoggi in Jamal Khashoggi, sorry, Adnan, his uncle, sorry, Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul. However, during the last days of his administration, Biden signed a deal with the Emirates to sell them the F-35 planes. However, when Biden came to power, he suspended the deal. Biden immediately after he won the presidency, immediately realized that he made a mistake, and he even visited Saudi Arabia. And the two countries resumed the good working diplomatic ties, even though their relations remained lukewarm because Saudi Arabia did not listen to Trump, to Biden, and decide to hike oil production. And instead, they lowered oil production in order to drive prices up. Now, why? The question is, why would the Emirates and Saudi Arabia prefer to see Trump coming to power? Now, they think that Trump is better suited to bring peace to the region. Trump made it very clear that he does not want to see conflicts in the Middle East during his presidency. And he told Netanyahu, finish your work before I assume the presidency because I have other things to do. He wants to focus on the economy and energy, sustainable energy, etc. And both the Saudis and the Emiratis are investing heavily in energy, in renewable energy, in high tech, etc. So the election, the return of Trump to the White House would mean a lot to them. And of course, Saudis and the Israelis have been postponing signing a new peace treaty until after Trump returns to the presidency, assuming that he would return to the presidency. And even though Saudi Arabia has been eager on establishing ties, formal ties with Israel, yet they decided currently with Israel to wait until Trump returns to the White House because they did not want to give Biden an impetus or a boost in his election campaign as the man who achieved for Israel the prize of having a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. So, these two countries have a vested interest in the return of Trump. Qatar is a different story because Qatar would rather see a Democratic Harris come to power. If you remember, in 2017, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt imposed a blockade, an austere blockade on Qatar. The blockade coincided with the assumption of Trump's presidency. Now, this blockade ended immediately after Biden won the presidency. So the Qataris have a reason to prefer a Democratic candidate wins the presidency. That's the issue in the Gulf.
Thank you. Chris, I want to ask you about one point that Hilal made, and this image of Trump as somehow he's able to craft this image of himself as the anti-war candidate. I'm close to be modeling then this happening in reality. For those of us who covered Trump, we've seen the level of instability in the region from moving the embassy to Jerusalem, cutting the funds to UNRWA, the tit for tat attacks with Iran, the attacks on Saudi oil refineries and on Fujairah in the UAE. How did Trump manage to actually sell this image of himself as the anti-war candidate? And is he, where do you see him on the issues of military confrontation in the Middle East?
Trump is a reanimation, if you like, of traditional Republican isolationism. So in the 1930s, for example, Republicans did not want to do anything about the Nazis in Europe, and it was a battle for Franklin Roosevelt to finally to get the United States involved in that war, which was so close to our national interest. Trump appeals to that same set of concerns. A lot of his support is rural, and people in rural areas in this country have long been of the view that we should just go about our business here, and what difference does it make what happens in the rest of the world, and the fact that we're the world's strongest power doesn't matter. So he is, in that sense, in that Republican tradition, and the right wing of the Republican Party now is very much on board for that. So they're on the issue of aid for Israel, for example, there were 19 Republicans who voted against that. And in case you thought that was a blow for Palestinian rights, you'd be mistaken. They vote against any foreign aid for anybody, including Palestinians. So it is that branch of the party that he represents. So he can look anti-war, just like the people who thought doing nothing about Hitler would be anti-war, and it didn't work out that way. The other concern about Trump that is not always as visible overseas as it is here is that he's erratic. And so the Chinese, for example, their preference for American leadership is somebody who is a calm, steady advocate of American interests, but not crazy. And Trump is not their choice because he's just not reliable, and he vacillates. So yeah, he's an isolationist, and that's how to think about it. But that also means that, as Amaney was saying, that his view is to give Netanyahu a free hand. And again, it's pretty clear, I think, listening to the candidates, that Trump is closest to Netanyahu. Biden was somewhat close, but with qualifications, and that Harris has sent continuing signals that she is further to the left of Biden on this issue. The current public opinion polls of Muslim Americans are at about 25%, or just a little above that, for both Harris and Jill Stein, who's the Green Party candidate, is an undivided advocate of Palestinians, and about 10% or 11% for Trump, and other people, other candidates, or not going to vote. And this is reflective of what new immigrant groups how they tend to behave in American politics. It's 3/4 of Muslim Americans were not born here, or are the children of people who were not born here. So they're learning, and they come from places that didn't have democratic systems like this. So they're still learning how they're going to decide. And a vote for Stein is a vote for someone who really does share your values and doesn't require you to compromise, and to deal with people who's aren't on your side. And a vote for Harris is a vote for taking a step toward coalition building and getting friends, and perhaps winning in the long run, in the way that African Americans did, for example, when nobody cared about them and nobody wanted to do anything about Jim Crow. They signed up with the Democratic Party, and they built friends, and eventually the Democrats took it down for them.
Thank you. I just have one final question to the three of you, but I just want to say, I wish we had time to discuss Jill's time. It'll be probably another 2 hours, just you and me. But I do highly recommend. She was on Mehdi Hassan's latest channel, Theo, and it was a very interesting interview, especially when it gets to the part discussing Russia and Putin. So try to, if you have time, try to watch that. My question to the three of you is, let's examine the teams that work for Kamala and for Donald Trump. What shape of administration do you anticipate? Is that I know Harris trying to address more her base. Do you see Amaney? Do you see her bringing on more leftist voices to the cabinet? Who do you see are the main people that are shaping her foreign policy thinking?
So that's a really good question. So I personally I'm trying to figure that out myself. And I'm wondering, again, the question for Harris is, are we going to see a departure from the Biden team? And we're not necessarily seeing a new cast of characters. At least I haven't seen them. I could be wrong, but up until now. And so what does this mean? We know that she has to pull the more progressive base. We also know that if she has a chance to win Michigan, she's probably going to have to try to pull away some of the uncommitted. And when just to make it clear, like the uncommitted vote, and people sort of like play it up, at least in the US media, that, well, that's a pro-Palestinian vote and a pro-Palestinian vote, and it means by default it would be anti-Israel. People are upset with Israel and the US administration for what's happening in Gaza, right? But in the end of the day, a pro-Palestinian vote also means a vote that would change the status quo in the Middle East, which is one that has ignored the plight of Palestinians. So how do we get back to, if it's even possible, a framework of two-state solutions? If you look at the role of the United States over the last 25 years since the Oslo Accords have been signed, the US has done, we're all talking about two states. What has the US really done to achieve two states or a peaceful resolution in the Middle East? And so this is something that Harris' team needs to come in with, with some credibility. If they're going to change discourse on this or change the course on this, where are the architects of peace? And I'm not seeing those yet.
Okay. I would just mention maybe, I would agree with you on the continuity part, but part of it is she is the vice president, but the people, Phil Gordon, Ilan Goldenberg, or helping her on foreign policy, are very much within the establishment now and the thinking that's driving this policy. But Dr. Khashan, in terms of Trump, Chris mentioned that he's embracing more this isolationism. He had in the last election, in the last term, somebody like Mike Pence as his vice president. Now he has somebody who's also more isolationist, JD Vance as the VP pick. Do you think the second, if he wins on November 5th, the second Trump term would be similar in foreign policy in the Middle East to the first one, or are we gonna see more isolationist bent to it?
Well, I think Trump's policy will continue. And I don't think he is in a mood to shift policy towards the Palestinians and as far as Palestinian statehood. What Arab publics are demanding is mutually exclusive from what the Israelis want. Specifically the establishment of a Palestinian state, which is not on his agenda, and actually is not even on the agenda of the Democrats, because they know it cannot happen because Israel will not accept it. Here, well, when you deal with the Middle East, there are core American values. And Israel is one of the core American values in the Middle East, and these are non-negotiable. So that's why I don't think Trump will change his policies. He will maintain what he did during his first term. But what will happen is that his return to the White House will further encourage the Saudis to accelerate their ties with Israel. And Saudis believe that the success of their Vision 2030 plan depends heavily on Israel's high tech. So there's a vested interest for Saudi Arabia to normalize publicly with Israel, and Israel views Saudi Arabia as the prize. And it seems that a Trump administration will move in that direction. In other words, what Trump wants to do is to finish off what the Palestinians call the Palestine question. And this is what's happening now in Gaza and what's happening in southern Lebanon between Israel and Hamas, aims at putting an end to resistance in order to fully normalize the region with Israel. And this is the new direction.
But on this point, I was just, Tanya and I got a news flash from Reuters that Saudi Crown Prince is saying openly that there will be no normalization with Israel without a Palestinian state. It's not even a path to a Palestinian state. We saw the UAE foreign minister on Saturday, I believe, reiterating the same thing. We will not have a rule in the day after without a Palestinian state. Are they more attuned to the public opinion now, or why would Trump change that?
Yeah, well, that's okay. The Saudi statement is situational. In the past, he said we will not make peace with Israel without achieving statehood for the Palestinians. Then he reneged on his statement and he said, all we want is the path, the initiation of peace talks that would eventually lead to Palestinian statehood. These talks have been going on since Camp David in 1978. And after the PLO and Israel signed the Declaration of Principles in 1993, they talked about a 5-year plan, nothing worked out. And when President W. Bush talked about the two-state solution and the roadmap, again, they're talked about five years, but nothing happened. Why would this happen now? So I think I wouldn't really take his statement at face value. I am sure he's willing to bend.
And this is a perfect segue to go to our audience. If you have a question, I think raising your hand, I can see all of you. And then please, let's open it up to an engaging conversation with you all. Why don't we start with my dear colleague, Raghida Darghan?
Yes. Why don't we keep one down there for you all to use, and then one can be passed. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joyce, and thank you for your interventions. I first want to say to you, Dr. Amaney, is that it's not correct when you first said that Trump wanted to advocate military engagement with Iran. I don't think that's what he wants. He wants Trump to turn Iran into a bankrupt state. So for him, that's a completely different approach, because for him, it's the matter of sanctions and not appeasing Iran as he thinks this administration is doing, not to make deals like the ones that Obama administration did in the past. And I think this is the most important difference between the Democrat Trump and the Biden-Harris team. It's Iran, and more than anything else. And as far as the Palestinian, I'm sorry, Doctor. I mean, I know you're right technically that they are talking about a path to a Palestinian state. That's the Saudis as well as the Emiratis, but that's important. You cannot dismiss that, because that's the language that they're using at the time that the Americans, both sides, are trying to raise that word Palestinian state. So, and since Saudi Arabia normalization with Israel is the bonanza, I think it doesn't matter for, both are competing for some sort of a continuation of the Abraham's Accord. It's not exclusively the Trump people. It is also the Biden-Harris people who are working right now, day and night. It's the approach that's different. The Biden-Harris team, that one of them was mentioned by Joyce, but basically led by, basically Anthony Blinken and of course William Burns and Brett McGurk, all those people, and Amos Hochstein. All they are doing all the time is that their approach is to go via Iran. Yeah, even for the ceasefire in Gaza, which is again about containment, it's about gradual steps. It's not about getting to a solution. It's the approach is incremental. It is it's not a complete package. And look at Lincoln now going to Egypt today and begging again that the Egyptians and the Qataris would pressure Hamas. At the same time, they're always depending on Iran, always betting that Iran will be the brick. So that the point is this. I'm not so sure about what you are trying to tell us in terms of differences. I feel that I feel that there's basically she wants me to ask a question and I really wanted. I thought it's fine to make a statement. But if you want me to ask a question, yeah, okay, I asked a question. I thought it's fine to engage in a conversation. Yeah, but can you please finish up your statement when you were saying that what is the point of the American-Iranian issues between them is not about the nuclear, it's about something else, and you never finished. That's what I said.
Yeah, absolutely. Since the Iranian Revolution, their objective was to export the revolution throughout the region. And that's why they created Hezbollah during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. That was the beginning. And I mean, to make a difference, they wanted to engage Hezbollah in a conflict with Israel because to become a regional power, you have to become an active player in the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially after Arab countries had abandoned the Palestinian question. Now, Iran wants to become a major regional power, but the US and Israel have not recognized Iranian desire to become a regional power. The problem between Iran and Israel is about Iran becoming the second pole in the region. After Egypt lost its status as a regional pole after the Six-Day War, there has been, Israel became the region's single power in the region. So Iran wants to fill in the vacuum, and they think they are entitled to it historically and culturally, and they want to get what they deserve, especially since Iran has a problem of encirclement. Iran is surrounded by countries that are unfriendly historically. So that's why Iran created proxies, and the main hurdle in the nuclear program between the Iranians and the 5+ was not the nuclear program itself, but the main issue was Iran's proxies, namely Hezbollah.
Great, thank you. We'll go to, sorry. Amaney wants to respond.
It's Naran. Hello? Yeah. Okay, so we're just really quick. So I think what I was trying to say, I said that I think Trump would be more inclined to engage on a military confrontation, thinking about Soleimani, taking out Soleimani and others, than let's say a Harris campaign, which also the tools of sanctioning are basically like a much more hostile position to Iran than more sort of in that spirit of trying to pull Iran into a nuclear treaty. But I just want to say one thing about Saudi Arabia normalization, if I may. The thing that's being ignored also here is the role of public opinion. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, the Crown Prince said that he felt he was going to be assassinated because of what's going on, perhaps in Gaza. So the question is like, now, the big question is, will Gaza and the way it has swayed public opinion in the Arab world sort of prevent the UAE and the Saudis from unilaterally normalizing with Israel, or UAE has already normalized, but will Saudi be able to normalize if Gaza has not been rebuilt, if there's no path to a peace process and whatnot? So I think that's going to be the key debate.
A very good point. Why don't we go to Ambassador Modellali and then we'll go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, AB and Bob Center and Dr. Amaney and Dr. I have two quick questions. The first one is, I really believe that this period between now and till a new president takes over, whether it's Harris or Trump, is the most dangerous period because we have a vacuum leadership in the United States, and we see it now in the lack of, I don't know if it's lack of influence or lack of will or whatever, reaching even a ceasefire. And it's the first time that the Americans, as Joyce has mentioned, that the US was not able to reach a ceasefire. We have 1982 and 2006, where the American president put his foot down and said, let's stop, and they stopped. I'd like to know from you why this has not happened. What does this mean for American leadership in the world and in the Middle East in general? And people say, Dr. Chris, that it's because elections. The president in 1956, Eisenhower did the 1956 intervention and stopped the tripartite invasion of Egypt. He had elections, right? I think I read that he was in the middle of his election campaign. So why is it this time that the Americans cannot, after 1 year and 40,000 people killed, cannot do that? My second question is, which is probably a little bit provocative because I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. I did not see a lot of difference in policy between Biden and Trump on the Middle East and the Palestinian issue. Obviously, I'm talking about, because if you look at it, he kept most of the Trump policy. The Jerusalem, he did not go back on the issue of Jerusalem, on the decision of Jerusalem. Yeah, they did not do anything on the two-state solution. There was nothing substantive. So really, there was nothing substantive change in the policy, and there was continuity. Do you think we're going to see the same now? Thank you.
Okay, so 2 parts. Chris, I'm gonna go to you for the first part. Is the US election the main reason we're not seeing a ceasefire, or is it really a decline in US influence in the region? Amaney, I'll let you answer the second part. Are Biden and Trump the same on Palestine, Israel? So.
I think this is probably a question we'll only know the answer to when the memoirs are written after the administration. This is the problem with instant history. We can't always know. In my mind, the biggest issue, and you're in a position to know much more than I would. I considered trying to see you while I was in Beirut, but I didn't. So I'm delighted to have the chance to say hi. The ceasefire has been pursued relentlessly by the Biden administration, and they just can't get the two sides to agree. Trump doesn't care about a ceasefire. So in the Khan Yunis attack by the Israelis, the administration brought very heavy pressure to minimize the death of women and children there. I think there are real differences now. What there are not are big policy changes of the kind that you're talking about. But I disagree with Hilal about Israel being a permanent American interest. That wasn't true in the Eisenhower administration. It wasn't true in the Carter administration. These are choices. And so again, from Muslim American viewpoint, how do you work toward an American politics in which those choices are different? Is voting for a party that's going to get 3% of the vote the way to go? Maybe, it's conveys your preferences in a clear kind of way. Or is it a longer term process of building alliances? 39 Democrats voted against aid to Israel. That's almost 20%, and voted on the grounds that you were talking about. There's a potential coalition, but if you're 1% of the population, you need to think about if you need friends.
Thank you, Chris. So I do see also qualitative differences. I know there's a lot of disappointment in the Arab and Muslim American community that Biden embraced Benjamin Netanyahu wholeheartedly, as has Trump, right? And this has resulted in what's happening in Gaza. Having said that, I think Harris has positioned herself left of Biden on this issue. She came out very empathetically, talking about the plight of Palestinian citizens in Gaza, neither candidate, Biden really wasn't able to articulate that. It's almost as if it's a liability to empathize with the slaughter of what's happening in Gaza. And initially, Trump tried to position himself as a little bit more empathetic towards Palestinians in the early days when it was against Biden. He sort of said when in my negotiations with Palestinians and Israelis, there was one side that wanted peace, another side that didn't. So he was on record saying that. When Mahmoud Abbas basically sent him a message about the first assassination attempt, he posted it on X and said, "Thank you, Mahmoud," acting like, he's buddies with Mahmoud Abbas. So again, this coincided with the dilemma happening between Harris and the uncommitted voters, and kind of create a deeper wedge there. Since then, Harris has positioned herself left of that. Again, I'm not one to defend U.S. policy on Palestine, Israel, just to be clear. Like I am on the Palestinian issue, I'm also disillusioned. But having said that, given that the moves that Trump made while he was president, sort of using the final status issues and making these choices on them, like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, doesn't give me much faith that he's going to invest in really building a framework for. And again, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish, but some sort of framework of coexistence that's not one about, which with all due respect, entrenched apartheid in terms of what's happening in the West Bank. And so we saw the Trump moves, not holding Israel accountable for settlement expansion, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, moving forward on normalization, ignoring what's happening on the West Bank. That is not a model that's going to bode well for reconciliation.
Hilal, I know you want to make a very quick point.
Yeah. US did not become a major player in Middle East affairs until after Charles de Gaulle imposed an armed embargo on Israel after the Six-Day War. In 1956, it's true, Eisenhower forced Israel, France, and Britain to pull out. I asked the same question to his son when I was at the University of Florida in the 70s. He said his father was a war hero. And for him, it was unfair for two major powers and Israel to attack Egypt. It was uncalled for because negotiations were underway to resolve the Suez Canal crisis. So as a war hero, he forced them to pull out. He thought what they did was not noble. In 1976, after he became president, it was Carter who advocated the idea of Palestinian statehood and allowed the PLO to operate in Lebanon until such a state is created. It did not happen. He could not do it. The same thing with Obama. Obama could not do it. Now, and after the Palestinian expulsion from Lebanon in 1982, it was Reagan who accommodated them in Tunisia. The question is, despite administration's efforts over the years, the idea of Palestinian statehood was denied.
Do you mind one more?
Maybe after at lunch, you two can.
I thank you for the discussion. Alexander Kennedy from Columbia University. So I have a question. We did talk, Columbia had a major uprising with students several months ago, and the campus just reopened. How do you guys feel about the young voters, not necessarily Arabs or Palestinian? How is that going to affect the election? These young voters, are they going to come out and vote their mind?
Those encampments and other demonstrations were a remarkable feature of last year. I was an undergraduate at Berkeley in the 1960s, so it was interesting, deja vu all over again, as the cliche says, and it was interesting to see both sides make the same kinds of decisions that they had made 60 years ago. I do not expect that those tactics will be exactly the same this fall, but there will be issues for sure. All that said, you have to understand that the people demonstrating out there are a small fraction of young people, and the issues they're talking about are critical to them, but they're not critical to most young people. In addition, young people vote a great deal less than older people do. The highest turnout rate in the United States is among 72-year-olds. Some people figure out in their 50s that, they should have been voting. Politics actually matters, and they started growing up. When you look at voter turnout by age, this has been true. We've studied this for 100 years. Young people just don't get there. They talk, but they don't get there. So I think the upshot of all of that is that it's not likely to make a difference. If it does, it's more likely to be that older people are unhappy with what they're seeing on college campuses, and that might do a push in the other direction. But young people themselves, it would be remarkable if they made a difference in the election.
I want to just follow up quickly. Does the Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush losses, does it enforce your argument? The squad members that lost in districts that AIPAC went in with a lot of support for their opposition. Is that also because of the young voters didn't show up, or is it mostly an AIPAC?
Well, both the AIPAC is widely thought to be the most skillful pressure group in American politics, and that's because they're smart, and they picked two people, the guy in New York and Cori Bush in Missouri, who already were in trouble from other things that they had done. Now, they made it easy for their opponents to run a high quality campaign with contributions, but those two people were already struggling, whereas the other squad members, AIPAC by and large stayed out, and those people were successfully reelected. But that's not to say that AIPAC is unimportant in elections. That's not the case.
I see 3 hands up, 4 hands up. Right, so why don't we do that? Why don't we take?
Been trying for so long.
Yes. But maybe 2, 3, or otherwise, let's do 2 at a time, or 3. Why don't we do this row over here? The gentleman here had his hand up for a while.
Hi, Jeff Laurenti. I'm one of Dean Jamal's Woodrow Wilson School alumni. And I wanted to raise the question of how the new splits within the American Jewish community, which had long been a bedrock Democratic Party constituency, are affecting the ability of Democratic political leaders to create some space that was not there before. One thinks of Carter and even Obama in their times when trying to take on a hardline government in Israel, being thwarted by AIPAC mobilizing the entire Jewish community. The rise of J Street has created an alternative that is being fought out in every reform and even conservative synagogue around the country, seeking or pressing a different claim explicitly, supporting under the rubric of being a pro-peace, pro-Israel lobby, a 2-state solution, Palestinian rights, and one sees a majority of Democratic members of Congress stampeding to the annual J Street meeting in DC, although bulk of the money and contributions still tends to be AIPAC run. How do you see this development portending a greater willingness of Democratic politicians to tilt more towards a just solution rather than simply what the Israeli government presents?
So let's, great question, we'll come to it, and then over here.
Hi, thank you for the meeting, very rich and interesting conversations. So I wanted to ask regarding the impact of the situation in Gaza on the proxies of Iran, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas. Do we think that the killing of civilians, violations of international humanitarian law, human rights laws, would actually help in weakening those and dismantling them through the military intervention, or as I see personally, this is only creating the justification and strengthening these proxies, especially on the grassroots level, because this only justifies their existence and presence, and people are realizing that they need them because they're scared and they need defense. So is this situation counterproductive to actually weakening the proxies of Iran? Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Let's go for the first question. Amaney, the split within the Jewish community, the emergence of J3. If you can perhaps speak a little bit about the Jewish vote, where do you see it headed now, and the future of the Jewish community in the US? And then the second question, I'm just gonna give it a US election tilt, since that's what we're discussing. Both Harris and Trump have committed that they would keep fighting Iranian proxies, and could that backfire to you? So let's.
So I'll just say one word and give it to Chris on the Jewish vote, because he knows a lot better, but there is this emergent picture. I mean, the polls that I saw recently is that the Jewish community in the US is divided almost equally between Trump and Harris, which it's not traditionally how the Jewish vote is allocated. Again, if the J Street supporters or the more progressive Jewish voters are voting Harris, that does create a different sort of type of connection that she has with her own constituency that might allow her to push a more progressive sort of agenda forward on the peace front. But I will defer to Chris, who is the expert in American politics. Yeah.
Actually, what I've seen is more commonly about a 70-30 split.
Okay.
And pro-Democrats among Jews. But again, we're talking 2% of the population. They're hard to survey, and one could be wrong.
When it comes to public opinion in the Arab region, there is no difference between Iranian proxies and those who are not interested in Iran or love Iranian proxies. Now, there is no question that Iran has used its proxies to emerge as a regional player. Iran learned a lesson after the Iran-Iraq war that ended in 1988, not to fight another war directly, and they wanted to create proxies to fight on its behalf. And then Iran could claim to be the guy who stabilized them and moderates their opinion. If you look at the proxies, Syria stayed out of the conflict. Iraqi militias heard a few rockets and drones that never reached Israel, and eventually they backed off. Now, what's happening is that the Houthis, every now and then, when they get a chance, they fire a rocket, and that's it. But most of their activities are targeted towards ships that cross the Bab al-Mandeb in the direction of the Suez Canal. Hezbollah miscalculated. They thought that the war in Gaza would last for a few weeks. It never occurred to them that the war would go on to finish this first year. And if you recall, a few years ago, the Iranians created what they called the unity of the fronts. And it was very important for them to engage their proxies in this conflict, hoping that it would reflect positively on Iranian interest in the region. But that did not happen. And I mean, to tell you the truth, if Hezbollah knew that the war would go on for that long, especially after what happened yesterday and today, they wouldn't have chosen to open a front in solidarity. And after the beginning of the war in Gaza, a month, Nasrallah waited for a month to say, this is not the time of the great battle against Israel, and this was a Palestinian decision, but we are supporting them to the extent of our ability. But Iranian proxies have not been successful in lending support to Gaza. If we witness what's going on, it has proved to be futile. And I don't think Iran is benefiting through its proxies from its involvement in the conflict, especially after it failed to avenge the assassination of Hani in Tehran.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We have 2 minutes.
We have time. We can take
We
more
could,
questions.
I don't wanna be the one standing between you and one. That's gonna get problematic, but okay, let's, so how many questions we have on the side, Tanya?
One, two.
1, 2.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody
Let's
dropped.
see.
Are you sure? Okay, let's take all the questions on this side and wrap it up.
I'll try to make mine quick. My name's Caroline Rose. Thank you so much, AUB, for putting on this event. There's been an elephant in the room with this election, and it's been the presence of US forward troops in Iraq and Syria. And I think we all can remember Trump, of course, withdrew forces from Northeast Syria, October 2019, rather quickly. In the fallout of the Soleimani strikes, in the spring and summer, there were 8 base transfers, and the United States halved its presence from 5,000 troops to 2,500. It's roughly still at that level. Of course, this has been a subject that has been suppressed given the election and, of course, the ghost of the withdrawal in Afghanistan. But I wanted to hear from the panelists, how do you see and what are the differences in how a Trump administration and a Harris administration would go about adjusting our presence in the Middle East, especially since escalation has affected the physical security of US forces that are stationed on the ground. This past spring, we saw Tower 22, where 3 US forces were killed in that strike. So I wanted just to see what your take was on the differences in a potential strategy.
Very complicated question. Thank you. Be here, cancel your dinner plan.
That's what Joyce works on, so she should answer it.
All right.
Mohammed Al-Qadri and from University of Connecticut. So, there are a couple of realities here that we should not ignore, right? There's a very powerful pro-Israel lobby. Bowman lost because the New York redistricting took away a lot of his district. But it's a powerful lobby. 39 people in Congress out of 430 basically were voted against funding Israel in the middle of a genocide, right? So this is a really not a high number. This is a very low number considering what's going on in the world. And the other reality is there's a very right tilt in Israel that is moving away from a 2-state solution and away from giving Palestinians any human rights or civil rights or anything of the sort. So these are the 2 realities. Does that not leave the US with only one option when it comes to the Palestine question, which is the Abrahamic Accords? That is a path, that's the only path forward, really, in light of these 2 realities. We are never going to have the guts to force Israel to do anything against its will, and Israel is not going to change its mind. And there's a political price to pay for not going with what Israel wants. So Israel wants Abrahamic Accords, and we all go to that. It gives an illusion of peace, but it is what it is.
Thank you. I don't know, how do you want to do this?
Well, on that optimistic note, that is a concern, right? I mean, so this has been like, let's just like sort of take this stance, like who cares about the Palestinians? It's early normalization. Israel has turned right anyways, do the Arab leaders really want a Palestinian state to begin with, right? So these are all these questions that you always hear of like, well, is this really an important issue? What we do know empirically is that every 10 years or so, the reality of what's happening in Gaza is the reality of the Middle East. So this is a region in general, the Arab world has seen more wars than any other region in the world. And we have to ask ourselves of the billions of dollars that are lost annually and decade over decade because of the wars that we're fighting, civil wars, internal wars, these external wars, that has held the entire region back. I mean, some of the most wealth in the world is located in this region, yet we are where we are because of the ongoing wars. And we know that the Israeli-Palestinian issue is a central feature of what's preventing more regional stability and peace. So again, back to my point, there needs to be visionaries, right? And this is what I don't see. I don't see this in the Harris team. I don't see this in the Trump team. And I don't see that the United States plays this role. And quite honestly, I don't see the European leaders coming out with this idea that enough is enough. We need a region where there's peace and stability for Arabs, for Palestinians, for Israelis. And the world order has an obligation to come in and say something has to give, right? And that's what they're not saying. So if you're gonna ignore it, then you have to be basically move towards this idea of, well, keeping 5 million Palestinians as second-class citizens in these enclaves is not working either. Certainly Gaza didn't work. So and it's my last point, the question about, sorry, what was the question? Sorry, I can't remember, but the question, I have to say one last thing. Is this empowering the Iranian proxies? Is this Gaza situation empowering the Iranian proxies? It really comes down to where, if we right now were to assess where we are with the Gaza war, we know that there's 41,000 people killed. There's devastation that also happened in Israel. We still have hostages being held in Gaza. What has been accomplished in 11 months of bombarding Gaza in terms of either Israel's strategic interest, US strategic interest, Palestinian strategic interest? And this is the question we have to ask ourselves. Who's better off today than not? You have to worry that the Iranian proxies have been empowered during this time period, right? They're the ones who are getting more mass support. They're the ones who are launching these incredible, these acrobatic feats. Yemen sending missiles to Tel Aviv, right? Hezbollah penetrating the security systems of Israel and publicizing it, and now sort of being shocked by what Israel can do as well. These cyber wars, right? Where is all this going? So this is the question about prolonging this war. Let's just forget for a moment, and I'm not trying to say that the 41,000 people are not inconsequential. Where is this going? If Hamas has not been defeated, the hostages have not been released, Iranian proxies have been empowered, if you want to take that point. Where is this going? And so this is why also, it speaks about all the more importance for having a ceasefire and sort of kind of like, resurrecting actors and players and strategies that are not leading towards this sort of destructive path moving forward. Sorry, I had to say that, Joyce.
No, I'm glad you got it out, but Hilal, any comment on the Iraq, Syria presence quickly?
Trump made it very clear that if he wins the election, he will pull out US troops from Syria. He said they are not necessary. And the other day, the Iraqi prime minister said the presence of American troops in Iraq is not needed anymore. Actually, I understand that fighting terrorism is crucial for either administration in Washington. But now, most US activity against Al-Qaeda and Daesh, takes place from the air. With the presence of the largest American air base in Al-Udaid in Qatar, there is no need for the presence of ground troops in either Syria or Iraq. So I think either way, whether Harris or Trump wins the presidency, I think US direct presence in the region, US direct military presence in the region will be scaled down, if not completely curtailed.
Great, well, thank you all. I'm just gonna move it to Amaney to do the concluding remarks, and we'll see you at lunch.
All right, thank you so much. I want to thank Joyce for being an outstanding moderator. I want to thank my colleagues, Hilal and Chris, for joining our panel. I want to thank all of you for coming out for this, and I want to, in particular, mention the Both AUB Collaborative Initiative that's also a co-sponsor of this event. The Both AUB Collaborative Initiative is the brainchild of Mamdouha Bobst, may she rest in peace. This initiative has been in the making for well over 12 years, almost 2 decades if you think about the initial gift. Here representing us today is Ranga Hafar, the niece of Mamdouha Bobst. And this collaborative initiative has done so much great work. Not only has Chris Putt in AUB, but Hilal joins us here. Tanya has joined us at Princeton. We've joined Tanya at Princeton. Graduate students are engaging and interacting. So we're very proud of this initiative in terms of creating stronger collaboration, stronger research connection, joint workshops. the showcasing sort of like expertise that brings colleagues from the American side and the Lebanese side together so that we can sort of contribute to knowledge production in more in more deliberate ways, if you may. And I just wanna quote what Mamdouh Haboub's vision was for this collaboration. I'm so proud that we're actually seeing it here actualized in this one in this form as an example. He said, "It is my profound hope that the young people who study at the center and participate in its programs will lead the way, whether as leaders in different parts of the world or as teachers and thinkers who bring new insights to age-old social and political problems." From Mamdouh Haboub. And today, I think we brought new insights, hopefully. I mean, it was a little bit depressing, but nevertheless, we're trying to bring new insights into these problems. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.